So we're going to enter into the tension this morning, and I hope that's okay with you. And my goal is to not mess you up, but my goal is to get you to go out to lunch with somebody and talk about this. So that's what we're going to do this morning. When I was growing up, my dad kind of introduced me to this whole mystery thing, okay? I used to collect baseball cards. And you might ask, okay, where are you going with that? My dad had these trunks of baseball cards just piled full. And we would get them out all the time, and we'd go through them and talk. My dad would teach me about Mickey Mantle, Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson. He had all these very rare baseball cards worth a lot of money. And he would teach me, kind of about the game and about these players who impacted it. We would go through it. And in 1998, okay, those of you who are baseball fans, there was this epic thing that happened to the game of baseball and is now marked by what we know to be steroids. But Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa just began mashing these home runs. And there was the whole nation was obsessed with who was going to hit the most. Because at that point, I think it had just been 61, Roger Maris, and everybody was on edge to see who was going to break this record. And it ended up being Mark McGwire, who hit 70 that year. 70 home runs. Inconceivable. And so, being baseball card collectors, me and my dad went downstairs to see if we had a Mark McGwire rookie card. Because those things were selling at that time for almost $300, which to a kid is basically like $1 million. So if I had a Mark McGwire card and I could sell it, I would be rich. So we went downstairs and we started looking through these things, and my brother had a trunk and I had a trunk. So we emptied this and we started going through all of these trunks, and my brother found a Mark McGwire rookie card. I did not. My dad counseled my brother to hold on to it because the longer he held on to it, the value would only go up. If you know what steroids did to the game of baseball, you now know that card is worth about as much as it was when you first bought it in 1985. So the steroid thing kind of ruined it, and my dad was wrong on that. But in the middle of this heated home run, competition between Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire, those things were worth hundreds of dollars. What's even more interesting is that the box that might contain, so if you got these unopened boxes of baseball cards from the same year, they were worth as much, right? I saw a Mark McGwire rookie card go for $200, and I saw someone buy a box that was unopened that might have that baseball card in it for $175. $25 less than actually having the card itself. Now, why would anybody do that? Why would you spend almost as much money as the actual thing for something that has the possibility of containing the actual thing? And very simply, I think the answer is mystery. There's something about us, as uncomfortable, as risky as it is, that we as human beings need mystery. We actually thrive off of it. And so whether it's a Mark McGwire rookie card box or this story that we're about to enter into, there's this draw to mystery. And if we avoid it, if we put the book in the freezer and run away from the mystery, we miss out on this great experience that builds community. So we're going to open up the story. It's going to start in Genesis 12. We're just going to hit the ground running. I hope you're ready for some really intense stuff this morning. So Genesis 12, verse 1 begins like this. Now Yahweh said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the world shall be blessed." So So we've talked about for the last 2 weeks, if you've missed it, the first week we talked about, like Kevin said, this great creation that God made. Last week, Randy talked about this terrible situation where mankind kind of decides that God's not good enough, and there's this brokenness that enters the world. Sin comes in, messes everything up. And we come to this point in the story where we're like, what's going to happen next, right? How are we going to get out of this? What's God's plan? And this is it. One guy and his family. And God says, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to leave everything that you know, take your family with you, and go to this place that I'll show you. Don't worry about it. I've got the directions. And through you, the whole world will be blessed. We're gonna tag team this. It's gonna be a restoration project, DIY. Are you in? Now, I like to think that I would be like, yeah, absolutely, God, I'm in for the restoration of the world. I'll follow you. But think about what God's asking Abram to do here. Leave his country, go to a place where they don't speak the same language, they don't worship the same God, they don't eat the same foods, they have different rituals and practices, and bring your family along with you. This is a family project that God is calling Abram to. And so I want to ask the question, is that something that you're willing to do? See, this thing that God is talking to Abram is actually kind of, if we're going to enter into the story, if we're going to make this story, part of our lives, God is asking us, are you willing to partner with me in this restoration project? And are you willing to bring along your family? Are you willing to leave your security? Are you willing to leave your comfort? Are you willing to leave your pension? Are you willing to leave the privacy of your own home? Are you ready to give up some things that you might be uncomfortable with in order to be a part of this thing? These are the questions that come out of this great plan that God has to fix everything. And the whole premise of it is unknown, mystery. You're not going to know what this plan is. You're not going to know where you're going next. You're just going to follow me. I hope you're okay with that. So it begins with mystery, and it only becomes more mysterious. Because Abram decides that he's in on this. God gives him a new name, calls him Abraham. And he travels throughout this Mesopotamian region and Canaan and all this different place out in the Middle East. And throughout his travels, he comes in contact with many people, even kings and pharaohs. And more often than not, even though he's been given this task of blessing the earth, he ends up failing more often than he succeeds. But God continues to use this guy, Abraham. And after a long time, God gives him this son. It's his only kid. And this is where it gets rough, okay? This is where it gets heavy. So we're going to jump into this story, and I want to go ahead and let you know that this is a story that has caused people to lose their faith, okay? I know people who can't believe in the idea of a loving God because of this story. So it's about to get heavy. It's about to get real. Let's go. Then God tested Abraham. This is in Genesis 22 if you're reading along. Then God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you. So what's God asking Abraham to do? You got one kid, kind of told you that we're going to do this thing together, that your family is going to become this great nation, it's going to be a part of fixing the world. I want you to kill your son. For me. I need us to be uncomfortable with that, okay? I need it to be awkward. that this is in Scripture, that this is a part of the story that we're reading. He doesn't give him a reason. He doesn't try to get him to understand why. There's not any, let me explain this for you. He just says, do it. As someone who one day hopes to have children, it's uncomfortable for me. For those of you who are parents, to sacrifice the life of your child. Heavy. And as heavy as it may have been, we don't really get what Abraham felt about this. We just get that he saddled up a donkey and went on a 3-day trip to do it. And as he ties him down, this is what happens. Then Abram reached out his hand, took the knife to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And he goes on to say, he says, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, notice that repetition, I will indeed bless you, and I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gate of their enemies, and by their offspring all the nations of the earth shall gain blessing for themselves, because you have obeyed my voice. My first question is, didn't he just promise that in Genesis 12? Did we have to go through this really traumatic experience to get here? And didn't you just say that you were going to do that? I mean, what's up, God? Why are you testing Abraham? I don't think we get a good answer. This is something to discuss in your groups or over lunch. But the point is, thankfully, we are saved, right, from the brutality. This doesn't happen. God doesn't make him go through with it. And so we're kind of rescued. We don't have to put the book in the freezer because it all kind of comes out okay. But there's still this kind of nagging question that God is asking something. He's demanding something, and it's costly. And he's not really willing to explain it. He's just wanting to see if you're willing. And this is uncomfortable for us. Thankfully, Isaac doesn't die, and some of us maybe already knew that going in. But sometimes that knowledge allows us to kind of skip through that rough part. So thankfully, Isaac doesn't die. He goes on to father 2 children, Jacob and Esau. They have a little bit of sibling rivalry, and they end up parting ways. Jacob heads off to the north. I'm summarizing the book of Genesis right now, okay? Just so you know, 40-some chapters, I'm just kind of putting in a nutshell here. But they have this fight. Jacob goes off, ends up marrying sisters. It's really complicated. He has 12 children by them, and they end up in Egypt because of a famine. And they become enslaved. They're worked harder than we could possibly ever imagine. They build Egypt, basically, according to the scriptures. And they cry out in their distress. And God hears them and raises up a man named Moses who goes to Egypt to set them free. So once he's there, his job is to convince Pharaoh to let this free labor go, right? Not an easy task. So God says, I'm gonna convince, I'm gonna give him an offer he can't refuse, I'm gonna send these plagues, and I'm going to convince him to make this happen. So God sends these national disasters on Egypt, one after another, and then finally we get to this epic pinnacle of destruction in Exodus chapter 11. The Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards, he will let you go from here. Indeed, when he lets you go, he will drive you away. Then Moses said to Pharaoh, Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out through Egypt. Every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne to the firstborn of the female slave who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the livestock. I thought we just, got through this, right? There's not supposed to be the death of children. We're supposed to be rescued from this. This is not supposed to be happening, even if it is Egyptians, right? This is still uncomfortable. God is saying that he's going to kill children. What is up with that? Why in the world would this be necessary? Again, we know that he's given them warning after warning after warning, but still, it seems harsh. It makes us uncomfortable. And again, this is a verse, this is a story that people come back to when they say, I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do the whole Christian thing because of this. And we have to be willing to listen to people who have that, because it is uncomfortable. I mean, if you think about it for your own family, that this God killed your firstborn child, that would cause some tension, I think, right? I don't think we're being heretical here. I think this is a question that we should be asking. The question is why? The question is what's actually going to happen here? So I think the story actually does have some tension relief here. So you kind of let the uneasiness go a little bit, but it's still a little mysterious, okay? So let's look at what actually ends up happening. Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, go select lambs for your families and slaughter the Pesach lamb. Okay, so what's happening here is that there is going to be this festival that gets tied to this story. There is a celebration, a national holiday for Israel that gets linked to this great, terrible plague on the Egyptians. And it's called Passover for us, right? We know it as Passover. In Hebrew, the word is Pesach. And what it means is, yes, it does have the meaning Passover, but what it also means is it means to protect, right? This is a Hebrew word for protect. When it's a verb, it means to defend or to protect. It's very interesting because when we get to what actually happens in this plague, it's going to be very important to pick up on what this word actually means. Does it mean Passover or does it mean protect? Let's find out. So he called all the elders together, and they select lambs for their families. And he says, take a bunch of hyssop, which is just like some weeds, some grass. He says, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and touch the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood in the basin. None of you shall go outside the door of your house until morning, for Yahweh will pass through to strike down the Egyptians. And then it says this, when he sees the blood on the lintel of the 2 doorposts, Yahweh will pasach that door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you down. It's a really interesting sentence structure there, okay? So we've got this idea that Yahweh's going to go through the Egypt, and he's going to look at the doorposts. And when he sees a doorpost with blood on it from the lamb, what's he going to do? He's going to pasach it. And I think, based on what happens next, that it means he's going to protect it, not just pass over. Because what happens next is it says that he will not allow the destroyer to enter your house to strike you down. So is it God or is it a destroyer? See, the Hebrew word is mashchit. Everybody say that with me. It's really easy to say. Say mashchit. Oh, that's just really fun to do. You're speaking perfect Hebrew now. And what that word actually means is kind of up for debate. Nobody really knows what it's a mystery word. but it usually gets translated as destroyer because that's usually what that word does whenever it shows up in the Bible. So these people are going to do this thing. They're going to go in their house at night, and they're not going to go outside, and God is going to go through door to door. And when he sees one of these doors with blood on it, he's going to protect it from a destroyer. It's not typically how we talk about this story. Because what's interesting is that there's the image of God protecting from some outside evil force, not that God is actually the one doing the killing. If you go back and you kind of look through it, there's very little evidence for the fact that God is actually killing. It just kind of says like they shall die, just kind of like it's going to happen, but it doesn't necessarily say that God's going to do it. Because right here, it's the image of him protecting from some evil force. Now, maybe that's comforting to you, and maybe that's not. Because what in the world is this evil force that we're up against? What's that doing in the story? We don't really talk about it. The story doesn't go on to explain, well, the destroyer is this, and there was this like war between God and the destroyer, and it's like, we want this story that explains it. But the story doesn't give us that explanation. This is the problem of the entire Old Testament, the entire story up until Jesus, is what in the world is this evil force? How are we going to ever feel like God is subduing this evil force and blessing and restoring the world? That's the tension of the entire Old Testament. And along the way, for thousands of years, people have been asking the question about the origin of evil, or what is Satan and demons and all of this stuff, and we look at these handfuls of scriptures to kind of have this conversation. But to be honest, the Bible doesn't really seem concerned with the origin and nature of evil. It doesn't deny its existence. It doesn't shove it off in the freezer. But it also doesn't explain it the way that we want it explained. And to be honest, I find this comforting because for some reason, the Bible is far more concerned with telling the story of what God is doing in spite of evil than being obsessed with what evil actually is. The Bible isn't interested in explaining why evil exists or how it got here. The Bible is really more interested in telling you the story about what God's doing about it. And in this story, God is defending the people that listen to his voice. That is a dominant image in the story. It's a mystery. It's enticing. It's confusing. But the fact of the matter is that throughout this mysterious journey, throughout this mysterious story, God is defending and protecting those people who are willing to sell out for the restoration of the world, for the reclamation of the brokenness that sin has left on this planet. I mean, if you want to get into the nature of evil, I can't give you many answers. I can't tell you why a group like ISIS exists and is seemingly not being able to be stopped. I can't explain to you why there are probably people in this room who have experienced abuse, racism, infertility. I can't tell you why those things happen because there's not a good answer. But the thing is that God is calling us into this unknown, this mystery, in an effort to reclaim what has been lost. And that journey, that story that you will have because of how you respond to that invitation will not be without cost. I can promise you that there will be times that it costs you dearly to be a part of a healing force in this world. The question is, do you think it's worth it? is the possibility of being in a partnership with the Creator to restore the brokenness of the world worth the risk? Would you be willing to put your family in harm's way? Would you be willing to set aside your finances for that restoration project? Would you be willing to give up the privacy of your home for that restoration? These are the questions that this story asks of us. To what end will you go to be a part of this? What will it cost you? And are you willing to give it up? I hope that these are things that you can talk about over lunch, that you can talk about in your groups, and to be quite frank, that you can talk about with the people who are bothered by these stories. That you can enter into a respectable conversation, acknowledging the tension, acknowledging the mystery, acknowledging the pain. But change the conversation to the mission of God, which is the restoration of the earth.